Wait, Joseph
This
said not
idea?
very far from his house. That is the
It just
most
took me-
powerful piece of evidence
I know.
that. Holy moly. All right, professor. Well, you're not a professor. You're a quasi professor. You're a neo professor. I called you the barrister. Let me ask you something. You were an attorney.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, by the way, Jonathan Neville's here again. On
Happy to be
location
here.
from where?
Where I'm in New Zealand right now, South Island, right about. I'm pointing to it right about here.
Nice.
This is Australia, for those of you who don't know geography, and this is New Zealand, and I'm pointing to it right there.
We got a little geography lesson from the but
And
now
I was telling Troy,
Yeah,
I've
go
got to
ahead.
finish my crumpet here, so here's my crumpet.
and I jokingly said when I talked to him earlier, I said, you got to go. He just woke up because it was like 10:30 here and it was like 5:30 there. And I didn't know it was that early when I called. I felt bad, but he was waking up because he's an early riser. And I said, you still haven't had your tea and crumpets. We don't drink tea, but we drink herbal tea. I don't know. I
Got
have
my
to.
water and tea.
Yeah, water and tea. But he literally was eating crumpets, and I didn't know that. So that means New Zealanders like crumpets as much as the Brits like their crumpets. Do they eat Vegemite there too in New Zealand, or is that just
Yeah.
They have their
No,
Vegemite.
they love it. I don't particularly like that, but they love it.
It's good if you mix it with butter and you spread it on fresh bread. If you like it. I always tell people that the closest thing to describing, if nobody ever had Vegemite, soy sauce. It tastes like if you made soy sauce into a paste, and people are like, why on earth would you put that on toast and eat?
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly what I think. So, but we do have super crunchy peanut butter down here too.
Oh, they like their peanut butter crunchy.
Well, they have plain, but they have super crunchy.
Super crunchy.
It's almost just like nuts ground, hardly ground up.
Wow.
Awesome.
Okay, let's see your shirt. Show us your shirt. Did you show us your shirt?
I've got my Phoenicia shirt on to
Nice.
memorialize the Phoenicia project, which is a topic we could discuss someday.
Yes, absolutely. And I changed my camera now that I can look at you instead of looking away from you. Not to get stuck on geography, but I was going to say earlier, well, I'll get to that in a second, and then we'll get on to what we're talking about. Do New Zealanders and Australians get along?
Yeah, it's kind of a friendly rivalry.
Kind of like
let me give you an
Samoans
example.
and Tongans, almost like that.
Maybe not like that. Those guys are a little more. But just as an example, at church on Sunday, there was a new missionary assigned to the ward, and they asked him to speak. So he started off by saying, well, I've got my mission call in Australia, but I'm not really Australian because I was born in Auckland. I just want everybody to know that I'm not really Australian.
Oh.
Even though he was born in Auckland, New Zealand, moved to Australia as a kid and lived there until he was called on a mission to New Zealand. So there's this friendly rivalry going back and forth all the time.
So it's funny that he had to make that clarification. He had to clarify that. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, it's kind of like in Utah, you got the BYU versus University of Utah stuff going all the time. One time we were up at the U at an event and I was wearing a BYU shirt and someone said, I can't believe you wore that BYU shirt at the U. And I said, why? And they said, well, don't you know about this rivalry? And I said, no, I'm from Oregon. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oregon Ducks, right?
Yeah, Oregon Ducks.
Okay. So I called you a barrister, but what is a barrister? What's the difference between a barrister and an attorney? Aren't they kind of the same thing?
Well, in England, they have barristers and solicitors. And the barrister, we would call them all lawyers, or attorneys. But the barrister basically appears in court and the solicitor does all the outside of court stuff.
So a solicitor would be like a paralegal.
Well, no, it'd be a lawyer like an estate planner or a contracts
Oh,
lawyer, something
okay,
like that.
gotcha.
Yeah.
And their attorneys are more like public defenders, aren't they? Like they're all state appointed,
Well,
or they?
no,
Oh,
no,
they don't.
they
Okay.
have private practice.
Oh,
It's
okay.
very comparable at this point.
Interesting.
Well, in New Zealand, they still wear the old wigs. They've
Yeah,
discontinued that in England, but they still do that here in
they
court. So that's
discontinued it in England. I did not know that. I
yeah,
thought they still practiced that in England
maybe in some areas, but for the most part, no.
because I know parts of Parliament still wears the wigs. I don't know if the House of Commons or the House of, I don't know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I don't
not to get on that subject, I just brought it up
know.
because you're a retired attorney. Okay, so you know what? I was going to have us read. Did you bring up the article? Do you have it with you?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so church releases statement. This is from Book of Mormon Central. Are you pretty, am I jumping the gun here, or do you know more about this than I assumed you did?
Well, what about Book of Mormon Central?
Let's first talk about Book of Mormon Central, not to get gossipy or anything like that, which I really don't, but I wouldn't mind a little bit maybe, but we're not going to.
Okay.
What is it about Book of Mormon Central that you like, and what are some things that maybe you have some setbacks on?
Well, I think they're all good people to begin with, and they're well educated, I guess you could say. They have millions of dollars of funding to promote their messages and stuff. And I always say, well, depending on my mood, that either has between 85 and 90% of what they do is great. But they do a lot of nonsense when it comes to issues of Book of Mormon geography and translation. And it's bewildering to me that they persist in this idea that well, that's why I call them Book of Mormon Central America. I have because it isn't really Book of Mormon Central, because they don't include all the perspectives on the Book of Mormon. They only include the ones that reinforce or confirm their bias towards Mesoamerica. So I've always been critical of them of being sort of advocates instead of a legitimate scholarly group. And yet they're great people, and I like them all. And over the years we've had conversations back and forth, and I'm eternally hopeful that they will come around someday and be neutral on issues of geography as well as translation of the Book of Mormon. It's basically the origin and setting of the Book of Mormon are the topics you would think that they would cover completely because of their name Central, but they don't. And so that's why I call them Book of Mormon Central America.
Well, I like that you said that you would rather them be, what was the word? You didn't say biased. What was it? It was neutral.
They're confirming their bias, but
right.
But I like advocates.
Yeah, instead of saying, well, we're Heartland or we're Mesoamerica or we're this or we're that, you take a Heartland stance, but what you're saying is at least Heartlanders are more, I find Heartlanders are people that go in that direction, more open-minded about
for sure
the ambiguity.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Sure. And the way I see it is Heartlanders already know the whole Mesoamerican argument, let's say.
Right.
Because that's been dominant for all these decades. And so we understand all that stuff. In fact, I was a Meso guy for decades myself. I used to go to all the farms things. I loved what Dan Peterson and Jack Welch wrote and all that stuff for decades.
Right.
And it wasn't really until I learned for the first time from Wayne May and Rod Meldrum an alternative point of view that I reassessed the whole thing. And it dawned on me the Mesoamerican stuff was delusional, actually. And I hate to say that term because it sounds pejorative, but it's basically a classic case of confirmation bias.
Absolutely.
They start with the premise that these events took place in Central America, and then they run around every way from an academic standpoint, it's delusional in my view. Well, I understand where they're coming from because I believed it myself for a long time, just because I was ignorant of alternatives.
It's confusing to people that what's interesting is people that aren't formally educated, people that love knowledge but aren't formally educated and have credentials in the academia world, are more
Yeah.
inclined. It's an oxymoron, or what would I say? It's inverted. People that don't have the credentials would rather look at scientists and think that they got to where they're at with their knowledge because of being inclusive on all areas of knowledge,
Yeah. Okay.
and that
Good
and
point.
but they're not.
They're
And so
not.
people that don't have those credentials are more open-minded about, shouldn't we look at
Hmm.
all the angles? But when
Yeah.
you're trained and you're credentialed and you become part of a academic clique, then that's
Yeah.
where you go, oh, I have to redact that, take that out. Don't look at that. Even if it makes
Yeah.
sense. Like Rod Meldrum was saying on the other video I put out that's getting almost 9,000 views. It's actually just keeps going and going. And yours are doing great too. Uh, that there is that closed-mindedness. It doesn't make sense to those who aren't credentialed. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and there's lots of pithy sayings about how that works, but the basic idea is they're trained to think a certain way. And if you're, let's say you're an ambitious young LDS scholar and you want to defend the church and write books or articles and do presentations, you have to adopt the Mesoamerican model because that's what your mentors and his teachers are doing. And
Right.
so you can't be employed at Book of Mormon Central if you advocate for a heartland idea.
Yeah.
Even if you acknowledge the heartland, you have a hard time being employed there. So they have to continually and constantly reiterate this Mesoamerican model from as many different angles as they can. And there's been some, for example, recently there was a really ridiculous article in BYU Studies about the how Korihor is punished. We won't get into that right now, but anyone reading that, it's laughable how absurd it is. And I didn't even bring it up. I was in a meeting recently, and these guys were laughing, and I said, "What's so funny?" And they said, "Have you seen this article in BYU Studies?" And that is funny because I had the same reaction when I read it. I thought, I can't believe this was actually published.
I always get,
But
okay,
it's
just to stop, I always get my Antichrist's uh, demise at the end of my Antichrist stories. I get them confused. Which Korihor was not struck dumb? Was he the one that was struck
yeah,
dumb?
he was
Yes.
struck down. Yeah,
Yeah. Alma struck him dumb, right?
right.
Right. Okay. The Lord struck him dumb. I'm sorry.
Lord
So what
struck
were
him
they
down.
saying, that was not
Well,
nice?
it gets into the interpreting some Mesoamerican cultural things to show that that's how Korihor was punished according to Mesoamerican mythology, and it's a long string of kind of what would I say assumptions. Let's just call it that they get to that. It's a cascading series of assumptions that they get to support Mesoamerica, but the substance of it isn't just
You mean
non-existent.
they're
And
reaching?
so
They're reaching.
yeah, they're reaching, you could say.
That's
That's a better
funny.
way to just put it. But it's just an example of one of the latest things that they do to these guys have to get published, and so they have to defend the Mesoamerican thing, and so they come up with actually pretty ridiculous presentations in many cases, and they're blind to it. That's the thing. It's a big bubble. The what I call M2C, right? The Mesoamerican two Kamorahs theory. It's a big bubble that they're in, and they can't see outside that bubble, and they think that's the whole reality. And it's, like I
But
say,
then
they're great
again,
guys.
there are some things about Heartland too. There are some people that do presentations. I haven't had them on yet, that I know do a little bit of reaching
Of
also.
course,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
any
everybody does.
in any area of academics, you're going to have people have good, I would say, well grounded, not just facts, but theories, that look
Well, it
good.
gets back to, we've talked about the faith model that I have, where everybody starts with the same facts, and then you have assumptions, inferences, theories that lead to your hypothesis. And everybody can look at the exact same facts, but they have different assumptions to interpret those facts. And then they fill in gaps in the facts with their inferences. And so in this case, everybody can read the text of the Book of Mormon the same. We all have the exact same text. Now, people argue whether you use the 1830 edition or the 1840 or the current one because there's some minor variations, but essentially it's the same text.
Right.
And from there, they interpret things differently. For example, the Mesoamerican guys, when it talks about a tower, they think that means a pyramid. And when I look at the word tower, I think it means a wooden construction of a tower, you know. But that's based on our assumptions.
I
When I
think
read the
what
Book of Mormon, I don't see anything in the Book of Mormon about the three J's I call the jungle, jade, and jaguars that you would expect to see in a Mesoamerican text, right? It's
you would
non-existent.
you would think some okay, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I think the jaguar thing is really a good point because you would think that somewhere in the Book of Mormon, Alma or Helaman or Captain Moroni is going to be like, and you know, I was taking the sons of the son.
Yeah.
What are they called? Sorry,
Sons of Mosiah
the
or
sons of
whatever,
Mosiah. Through Mosiah's taken through, and then we came across some jaguars, or maybe Nephi. I went to hunt beasts in the forest. Well, that was actually back in, but you know what I'm saying. You think somewhere they're going to talk about the jungle was thick. You know,
Yeah.
they would have probably had, right. I understand your point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the other thing too, but here's where, and we're going to get into the article that we're going to read together. It's not very long. And it came out in 2019. But the one thing that I had Brant Gardner on, he didn't really get into very many details. He just was, it's funny because he just kept saying, I'm retired, man. I'm retired. It's almost like that's behind him now. I felt like he was just exhausted, you know? And I'm like, hey, don't you want to plug this book? Don't you want to do that? And he's like, whatever. I'm retired. I don't care. I think he's going to come on again. But the thing that I like about Mesoamerica, though, is that if they were a temple building people, Lehi left 600 BC, and it was 400 years after Solomon. So they knew about temples. They're a temple building people. They bring that knowledge with them. Aren't they into masonry, though? Wouldn't they want to build their temples out of concrete? If it just like the Solomon's temple? Or there's nothing really.
It's mostly stone.
That's what I'm saying. There's no stone temple structures in Heartland. So how do you feel about that?
There's not a lot of stone. There's not a lot of stone there. The Heartland is mostly earth. That's why they built these massive earth structures.
But see, that's my point. That's my point. Mesoamerica has more of a, if they were a temple building people, I would look more to Central America than to Heartland.
Yeah, maybe I could see that superficially, but the reality is that the Mayan pyramids have nothing to do with any temple.
Unless Lamanites came and tagged them up, graffitied them up later.
Okay.
I mean, they're squatters. They're freaking squatters.
I was just reading today an article about a guy who, from New York, he went on vacation for 3 weeks and he got this water bill. So he asked the water company to turn off the water in case there was a leak or something. Turned out squatters had moved in, and they can't turn off the water because there's people living there. And after 30 days, they become tenants. And then he has to go through the eviction process, which takes a year or more in New York. So he's just basically lost his house by going on vacation. So in terms of squatters, yeah, okay, you could say the Lamanites were squatters in the the Nephite temples that were built as pyramids instead of as the Temple of Solomon.
Well, you think they win the wars, they win the battles, they kill off the Nephites, then they come in and they tag up their temples and their buildings and they carve paganistic things into them. It's a possibility.
Okay. Anything's possible.
All right.
It just doesn't. To me, that's the kind of a stretch you'd have to make to justify that. And, okay, people stretch things.
All right,
basically, if you've been to Israel, it's all rocky. You can't build with dirt over there. They do have some mounds, but it's all rocks. Whereas in the heartland of North America, it's all dirt. So that's why they have massive earth structures instead.
Right.
But
yeah, and And if Heavenly Father doesn't mind wooden temples, I mean, there are people. There are civilizations where wood lasts for centuries, right? I mean, over 1,000 years sometimes.
Sure.
Wood structures have lasted a long. Look at China. Look at Asia.
Sure. In the Book of Mormon itself, they describe building with earth and with wood. The only thing they said they built out of stone was a wall at one period. And then they talked about cement and a little bit in Helaman just for a short period of time.
Really?
Which cement was prevalent in North America also. But they never talk about massive stone structures.
Really? They never. Okay. See, I don't pay attention to that. That's interesting.
Okay.
That's interesting.
But these debates have been going back and forth for years. And so
I didn't know that. I'm not into the debate. I don't know all the ins and outs on the debate. So, all right, let's take a.
I think getting back to the main point is that if you go to Book of Mormon Central, you don't see these different sides presented because it's all Central America.
Right, and things are redacted, and that's what we're going to read today. Okay, so let me just go ahead and share this, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so this came out in 2019, and you're familiar with this, right?
Yeah.
Church releases statement on Book of Mormon geography. Let's read this and talk about it. Do you want me to read, and then you stop me, or do you want to read and talk about?
Oh, you can go ahead and read it. You
like,
can
do you want
see it easier than I can.
Stop me if you've got. Okay, so here's the thing. This is Scriptural Central. It used to be called Book of Mormon Central, and the brother and sister. What is her name? They came down. Her husband's a 70, and she's kind of like a co-president or vice president of Scriptural Central.
Are you talking about Lynn Wilson?
Wilson's, yes. Nice people. I've met her. I met her husband. They came down for 3 days to our stake when we had a stake conference. He's a sweetheart. Very nice person. I noticed you haven't said anything there.
I don't. You're doing fine.
Okay. I'm like, do you know otherwise? No, I'm joking.
No.
Okay.
Like I said, everybody there is great.
Okay. That wasn't convincing. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Well, they are. I like them all. So
I'm looking over here because the when we minimize this, the screen goes over there. So I'm going to move it over here to the camera there. Now I can look like I'm looking at you. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't laugh much, do you? Okay. Church releases statement on Book of Mormon geography, Scriptural Central, January 29th, 2019. Yeah. And then we have a picture of the earth, the world, Book of Mormon. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints released a statement today concerning the geography of the Book of Mormon in the form of a new gospel topics essay titled Book of Mormon Geography. Now, since then, gospel topics essays are no longer a primary source. They are now a secondary source within topics and questions, right? That is right. So, Book of Mormon Geography, the new essay begins with this declarative statement. The church takes no position on the specific geographic location of Book of Mormon events in the ancient Americas. Church members are asked not to teach theories about Book of Mormon geography in church settings, but to focus instead on Book of Mormon's teachings and testimony of Jesus Christ and his gospel. Okay, so far, everything looks great.
Sure.
Agreeable, right? What follows are a few short paragraphs giving a general overview of the history of Latter-day Saint interest in the geography of the Book of Mormon. Quote, since the publication of the Book of Mormon in 1830, members and leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have expressed numerous opinions about the specific locations of the events discussed in the book, says the article. Some believe that the history depicted in the Book of Mormon occurred in North America. Now, here's what's funny, and this is a reason why I wanted you to do this, because I don't take a stance, but the more I learn about Heartland, the more I start gravitating away from Central America. especially when you just told me about wood structure. I'm going to go look up Book of Mormon stuff that talks about wood. That's neat. I love that. That's the stuff I eat up. But as I was...
Well, what you're describing is the path I went down, because I told you I was a total Meso guy for decades.
Well, yeah, I think I've even come across some of your stuff where you're talking about it.
Yeah.
And you can't go back and erase all that because it's already in the cyberspace.
Sure.
But so as I was reading this, I was like, this is fine. No problem. I don't have, everything is lining up. It sounds like Book of Mormon Central's putting out this non-biased thing. Well, as we go on, I started feeling problematic, and I'll show you. So they start saying, okay, this is, we should, the church has no stance. People have different views. Some believe that
you were reading, some believe history depicted occurred in North
depicted
America,
in the Book of Mormon.
Others believe that it occurred in Central America or South America.
Yeah, although did you want to read?
Well, yeah, I can, but to me that's funny right there, because
that's what I was picking up on. Go ahead.
There's also people who believe it happened in Africa or Asia.
That's what I was like, what about those theories?
Yeah,
right.
I know. And this is one of the ironies I've talked about before, is why are they limiting it to the Americas? And the only reason, the Book of Mormon itself doesn't say anything about America, right?
No.
So the only reason they limit it to the Americas is because of what Joseph and Oliver said. But Joseph and Oliver also said that Kamorah is in New York, and they just omit all that.
Well, we're going to get to that. You're jumping the gun.
I know, but I pointed that out here because they don't talk about people who believe it occurred outside of the Americas.
Right.
This essay.
But that's what came to my mind after that sentence. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was like, there's people that believe that the continents were together at that time, right? And that Africa, and there could have been some stretch there. The continents were different. And then it says...
people even say that Malaysia and Eritrea and other places fit the descriptions in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
In fact, of all the places around the world that I've been that the ancient ruins look the most like the Book of Mormon, it's in Cambodia, because they have elephants, chariots, heaven and hell, all these kind of things on their murals, that if you were just looking at it objectively, you say, okay, these were ancient Christians, and they had all the things that the Book of Mormon talks about.
Well, and if you're a believer in Pangea and a global flood and the continent separating at one time, maybe that happened during the Book of Mormon earthquake before 3rd Nephi. I don't know. Maybe Israel was somewhere completely... Look, I'm just throwing that up there. So it's funny, the Lord's going to come. You're going to have your Heartlanders waiting for him. You're going to have your Central America people waiting for him. And he goes, you're all wrong. It was in Malaysia.
Yeah,
okay.
There you go.
Okay. So, and then the righteous, real Lamanites and Nephites will stand up. Okay. So then it goes on.
The next sentence is, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, the next sentence is the one that's ironic, because it says, although church members continue to discuss such theories today, the church takes no position on the geography of the Book of Mormon, except that the events it describes took place in the Americas, which is exactly what I was saying. Why do they say it took place in the Americas? Because that's what Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery said. But they also said Kamorah was in New York, which this essay doesn't even mention. And I can give you some background on that when we get to the end of this. But to me, when I read this, it just comes across as funny to me.
Oh, right. Okay, so we ended up place in Americas, right?
Right.
We ended here?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So they're trying to sound as non-biased as they possibly can, right? Close quote. Then it goes, the essay also explains how the prophet Joseph Smith himself accepted what he felt was evidence of the Book of Mormon civilizations in both North America and Central America. You know what? Why don't you read and talk? Because you're going to know when you need to stop and when you need to talk. But this was the most problematic to me, because I was like, nope, I've studied with the barrister and he would disagree with this. And
Yeah.
tell me why.
Well,
Go ahead.
it is funny if you notice what they put in quotations there. Let's read this and you'll see how it's different from the actual article. So the article said, while traveling with Zion's camp in 1834, Joseph wrote to his wife Emma that they were wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as a proof of its divine authenticity. Now let's just stop there first, because people may read that and not even know what it's referring to. Joseph left from Kirtland, Ohio, crossed the state of Ohio, then Indiana, and then Illinois, and he was on the banks of the Mississippi River when he wrote this. So what he referred to as the plains of the Nephites was Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And there's hundreds of mounds there. There used to be far more. Most of them have been plowed over. But even then, back then, they could pick up their skulls and bones. What skull and bones did they pick up? Well, one of them was Zelf. And if your listeners don't know the Zelf story, they need to look that up. But the key point here
Well,
is
and
they
then
were
Ward
picking,
Radio just did this thing with what's his name?
Don
Bradley?
Bradley or
Don
yeah, Don Bradley.
Bradley, and the name of the video is Zelf Off the Shelf.
Okay,
Zelf.
haven't seen that one.
I haven't yet.
So,
I want to see it. I'm plugging
but the
their
point
show.
is,
They don't plug me. Anyway, go ahead.
okay, but the point here is that this is on Zion's camp, and Joseph said that they were roving over the mounds, picking up their bones as proof of its divine authenticity. And that's a key phrase, right?
Right.
Joseph Smith considered the geography and the archaeological and anthropological evidence as proof of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. So it's not just some ancillary, unimportant thing. He considered it to be proof of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. And that's the same reason that Oliver Cowdery wrote that letter number 7, where he talked about Kamorah, because he was fighting against the anti-Mormon idea that the Book of Mormon was fiction. And he said, no, it's not fiction. In fact, the hill Cumorah that it talks about is right here in New York, and he described it in detail.
What if the Bering Strait was the narrow neck of land?
Well, it
And
wouldn't be a narrow neck of land. It would be a narrow neck, but not a narrow neck of land.
But remember, there could have been some geographical changes, and now there's some water there.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And it is kind of north. If you look, Alaska's right here. Well, you're looking that way. And then Russia kind of goes up at an angle. The land north is Russia, and Malaysia. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, good. Not to confuse. So what I'm trying to do is throw up all these scenarios so that Book of Mormon Central, it weakens them even more.
Well, we're not trying to weaken them. We're just trying to point out that they are so myopic on this topic.
Right. And then go ahead.
Well, I'll continue. So after Joseph Smith says that the ruins of the Hopewell in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois are proof of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Okay, that's what Joseph Smith himself said. Then the next thing in here, it says, I have to read it with a straight face, so here I go. In 1842, the church newspaper Times and Seasons published articles under Joseph Smith's editorship that identified the ruins of ancient native civilizations in Mexico and Central America as further evidence of the Book of Mormon's historicity. So,
but there's no proof of that. There's no proof.
Yeah. Well, first off, it's under Joseph Smith's editorship. Now that's based on the boilerplate at the end of each issue that said the Times and Seasons is printed, published, and edited by Joseph Smith.
Well, that's like that's like the prophet saying, "I got a signed letter from the President of the United States."
Yeah,
it's all a machine now that signs his signature. They copy his signature, and even Ezra Taft Benson's signature when I got my mission call was one of those machines.
Sure. Yeah, of course. And President Benson didn't sit down and handwrite the letter to you. So there's really no evidence that Joseph Smith actually edited the Times and Seasons. just like nobody believes he actually set the type and ran the printing press, even though it said it was printed by him.
I don't think he had
And
time to
that's,
do that.
yeah, of course he didn't. In fact, during this time, I've written about this, that Wilford Woodruff made the comment during this period of 1842 that Joseph hardly had time to sign the documents that they prepared for him. So if he didn't have time to even sign documents, he certainly didn't have time to sit around and leisurely edit the times and seasons.
It's the
So the
same.
whole,
It's the same thing going on today with middle
yeah,
management in the
of course,
church making their own unilateral decisions,
right,
and
yep,
where the prophets like Elder Ballard sign here. What is
yeah,
this? Oh, da 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 da. Okay,
yeah.
and then they
Well, that's
trust
what
these
this whole
people.
essay is.
Yeah, right,
This whole essay was not written by the leaders of the church. It was written by a committee. We'll talk
right.
about that in a minute. But so this is just kind of funny to me, because if you look at the introduction to this paragraph, it says the essay explains how the prophet Joseph Smith himself, that's all Book of Mormon Central's language. And then the quotation accepted what he felt is from the essay. So they're transforming this fairly equivocal article when it's referenced to the times and seasons into Joseph Smith himself said it,
Right.
which is that's their whole basis for looking at Mesoamerica are these articles in the times and seasons. If it wasn't for these articles in the times and seasons, there would literally be zero reason to look in Central America. That's why any non-LDS Mesoamerican expert thinks this whole idea is ludicrous, that a bunch of Christian Nephites are running around Central America. It defies all the evidence. And in my view, it defies the teaching of the prophets, but we'll come to that.
Okay.
So then it goes on here to say that this article, or the article concludes by emphasizing the church's neutrality on Book of Mormon geography and quoting President Nelson on the importance of the book's primary purpose to testify of Jesus Christ and his gospel. And then here's the funny part, though. This is the best part of this little press release. Like the church, Book of Mormon Central, quote, is officially geography neutral. we seek deep understanding of the
Yes.
Book of Mormon text.
That's what it became laughable to me as I started reading, and I was like, what are you
Yeah,
talking
it's awesome.
about? You just set up there something that was taken out of context, and now
Yeah.
you're saying that it's while you're being biased, and not to jump the gun, but you get down here and it gets totally into just, yeah, it's just
Well,
nuts.
and you know what, Troy, the funny thing is here, they have their Spanish language website, and it is all about Central America. They have a detailed map of Central America showing where all the locations were, and they tout their expertise as these American, credentialed PhDs that have all the expertise, telling the Central Americans that they live in the lands of the Book of Mormon and identifying them in particular. But so when they say here it's officially geography neutral, it's just an outright lie, and it's just for their fundraising people.
I have a question though. We're not saying that the Lamanites didn't migrate south
No,
and
no,
that they're blossoming as a rose, like Spencer
right.
W. Kimball said that they would.
Yeah,
Because
no,
the
that's all fine.
argument they will bring up is, well, how many North American Native Americans do you know that are blossoming like a rose today?
Yeah,
Or
sure.
is the church growing among the Lamanites in North America?
Yeah,
What?
I've heard that argument. I've
Right.
heard the argument that the church is building all the temples in Central America, therefore they must be Lamanites. And I'm thinking, well, by that definition, the people in Utah are the Lamanites, because that's by far the highest
Right.
concentration of temples.
Well, and the
And
church is
you
growing
also,
in Africa too, but they're,
yeah,
they're not Lamanite. Well, are
Africa
they,
and the Philippines both.
Right.
The church is not growing fast in Central and South America. It's growing fast in Africa and the Philippines.
Right.
So by that measure, the Africans and the Filipinos are the Lamanites. I
Right.
mean, it's just a series of non sequiturs to justify the Central American setting. Anyway, so here, that's what makes me laugh when I read this, because they say they're officially geography neutral. Why would they say that when anybody can look at their Spanish page and see that they're absolutely not? And as you pointed out down below, their no wise are also trying to promote Central America. So then it goes on here to say, in the past, BMC has highlighted evidence for the Book of Mormon found in both North and Central America. And then it talks about the barley and why was it Benedict scourged. So I don't know what you're looking at here, but
Oh, did I screw it up?
Bering Strait.
Did
You switched over to the Bering Strait
I'm
again.
sorry. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I forgot I was
Okay,
screen
so-
sharing. I was going to look up. Keep going. I'm sorry. I'll edit that part out. Good.
Okay, but I want to say again, I want to reiterate that I really like the people at Book of Mormon Central, and I still have high hopes for them someday actually living up to their own professed policy here.
Oh, I know you do. You're even friends with a lot of them. I know, Jonathan.
Yeah,
You're
they're
not.
great people.
Absolutely. And people know that about you. You're a good-hearted
My
person.
door is totally open to them. I'd love to meet with them and go through all this. But until that happens, we need to talk about this because it goes like the next part is one of my
Well,
favorites too.
doesn't the Book of Mormon, does the Book of Mormon mention anywhere where, does it mention that there were other people occupying the land before Lehi? Does it say?
Well, that's an item of debate because at one point Lehi said that the Lord protected it so there would be no other nations there, so they could occupy the land.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when they landed, Nephi says that he took him and his family and those who followed him, and they left to avoid his brothers, right? And so the implication is that there were other people there, and which I agree with. However, they weren't nations. In other words, Lehi was promised there would be no other nations that would prevent them from taking possession of the land.
Right.
But there were other people there, and which I
Well,
interpret.
and then if it did happen in North America, maybe there were no people there, but there were people in Central and South America.
Well, there are definitely nations in Central and South
That's
America.
what I'm saying, is it makes more sense. A heartland stance makes more sense as far as not being peopled, a land not being peopled, or at least seriously peopled.
Yeah, not organized.
We're not talking about tribes and nomadic
right.
people.
Yeah. And it turns out, in Florida around 600 BC, there were hunter-gatherer types people. And when you go to the museums down there, they say around 600 BC, they began more of a farming practice, which is also evidence that when the Nephites landed, they say, hey, you can grow more food by farming. That's a whole fascinating topic we can talk about another time. But for now, let's go back to this essay because it says, again, I have to be serious. It says, our policy is to utilize the most reliable academic scholarship on the Book of Mormon and follow the evidence wherever it might lead. Wherever it might lead. Now that's
you're not.
As you mentioned earlier, lay people who aren't scholars think that's what scholarship does.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you're going to look at all of it.
Right. Right. No, they don't. He says our process in selecting and highlighting Book of Mormon evidence is based on the following principles. Number one, in our hierarchy of evidence, the text itself is primary because it is closest to the divine. Now, that to me is one of the most ludicrous statements ever uttered on this topic, because the text itself is primary, but it's not the interpretation of the text that's primary. And that's where, everybody sees in the Book of Mormon whatever they want to see. So and just as the example, of say, reinterpreting the text, they're not saying the text is primary. They're saying their interpretation of the text is primary.
Right.
And all of their articles are based on that idea, that their interpretation is correct. Although it is closest to the divine, we could say that. Then the next one says, if profound and compelling location-specific insights shed light on the text, we highlight these regardless of their geographic provenance. And that, of course, is simply not true. The next is, we favor authors with credentials in their areas of interest. And I find that one funny because as I mentioned, any non-LDS,
as long as they believe believe in our narrative, and then we favor them.
That's it. They favor authors who already believe in M2C.
Like whether you believe it happened in Panama, or no, what was it? Not Panama, sorry. Whether you believe it happened in Peru or you don't believe Peru, that's okay. You could say that, right? As long as you knew it happened in Mesoamerica.
Well, Peru's not Mesoamerica, but okay.
Right. You know what I'm saying. South America.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Okay, well, the next one is here. We favor formally published works from reputable presses. Okay, well, their idea of a reputable press is their own press, which is the Farms organization that publishes all their books. So then, and does our book, which co-publishes them. But I could tell you stories about that too. But the point is, they don't accept any published reputable press that is not a Mesoamerican press. I mean, M2C press. So in other words, if the vast majority of books written about Mesoamerican archaeology and anthropology and history and all that, they don't accept because all that stuff says it's not has nothing to do with Christianity or Jews. But the thing that's missing in here that's just stares out at you are the teachings of the prophets. They give zero credence to the teachings of the prophets. And that's why they don't put letter 7 in here, Oliver Cowdery's letter 7, which was republished several times during Joseph's lifetime. They don't even put the Doctrine and Covenants in here because it contradicts their narrative. So their whole hierarchy of evidence is completely illusory. And members of the church don't realize that they are completely repudiating the teachings of the prophets here. But everybody can read this for themselves and see that they give zero credence to the teachings of the prophets. Then the last thing is, which is kind of funny, as explained in BMC's statement on geographical neutrality, we welcome good work from any geographic persuasion that is responsive to these principles. So let me give you just one quick anecdote about this.
Sure.
Years ago, I gave Book of Mormon Central my book on letter 7. I gave them a PDF and I said, you can put this on your webpage, which they did because they went through it and they said, well, all this is church history. So it's good work. We need to put it in there. And they had it in there for about a year or so, but it started getting so much attention that they took it off their website. I mean, that's how, when
That's
they say
bad.
here, isn't that ridiculous? So that's an example of the problem here.
Oh
with,
my
Book of Mormon
goodness.
Central.
And we're Latter-day Saints, we're supposed to pride ourselves as being people that seek and thirst after truth. After
Right.
truth, not my truth or the biased truth or the narrative that makes me money or publishes books truth, which actually doesn't anymore. The Heartland is taking over. We need to go in to BYU and they need to just bring in a whole bunch of the new generation. Watch, 20 years from now, they'll be 35 years from now, they'll be if the Lord doesn't come yet, but I know you don't think he's coming yet. There'll be a bunch of
I don't know when he's coming.
I'm joking. Mesoamerica people saying the same thing you do because BYU is going to be inundated with Heartlander professors.
Yeah.
Watch.
Yeah.
it'll topsy-turvy.
It will be. And here's another, I'll tell you another thing about this essay. So the original version of this essay quoted President Lund, Anthony Lund, I think it was Anthony Lund, who was a member of the first presidency, and they quoted him because he said that there was that we shouldn't be stuck with a particular geography, words to that effect. And that was in the original version of this essay. It was Anthony Ivins, not Lund. Anthony Ivins. He said there is nothing. The original version of this essay said there was never anything definitely set forth that settles the question of Book of Mormon geography. So we're waiting to discover the truth. That was in the original version of this essay that was released in January that this article is talking about here. So on my blog, I analyzed this essay. I said, all right, if you're going to quote Anthony Ivins, you ought to quote what he said the year before when the church purchased the hill Cumorah, where he reiterated that that was the site of the final battles and all this stuff.
Right.
And so in response, 3 weeks later, the church revised this essay and took out all the Ivins stuff because they recognized how foolish the original version was. And so I documented all this. If your readers are interested, I'll give you.
Yeah, absolutely. And where is that? Which book is that?
Well, this This is on the church's website. When this article,
No,
the
where
one
did you
just read-
document this stuff?
Oh, on my blog, one of my blogs.
Okay. And
So-
just to let you know, the blog is right there underneath Jonathan Neville. I always put your website there now.
Okay.
And
Well, this one was.
well,
this
before we
blog
go
was-
on, I want to
Okay.
plug your books. Let's talk about
Oh,
so
okay.
we've got, as you can see, because I always put them there when I edit.
Uh-huh.
As you can see, there are 3 books: Rational Restoration,
Nice America, I think you had on there.
by means of.
by means of the Urim and
I almost
Thummim.
said by way of Urim and Thummim. By means of Urim and Thummim.
Yeah.
And where the heck is the land of Zarahemla?
Okay. Yeah. The lost city of Zarahemla.
The lost city of Zarahemla.
I should have called it. Where the heck is it?
Where the heck is Zarahemla?
Okay.
So, folks, if you order any of Jonathan Neville's books, any one of these 3, or any of the books that he has published through Digital Legend Press, not just one book, but if you order, you'll get 15% off your initial order on all Digital Legend Press books authored by Jonathan Neville using this promo code, The Last Dispensation. It will be in the descriptions field under Jonathan's links. Also, if you happen to have not used the promo code link, if you just simply enter the promo code The Last Dispensation, capitalized and all together, no spaces, The Last Dispensation, in the discount box at checkout, you get the same deal. So this is your initial order. You get 15% off your first orders of any of his books. So if you order 10 books in the initial order, then you get 15% off. So use the promo code. The link is in the descriptions field under Jonathan Neville's links. But what about desolation? That's a whole other thing. Go ahead.
On this particular issue of geography, the Moronites America goes through it pretty well. That's the one that talks about geography in particular.
Okay.
But the point is that this essay first off, it was written by a committee. It wasn't written, President Nelson didn't sit down and write this essay. It was written by a committee of scholars headed by, there's a committee chairman that was a 70, I think. And the idea was proposed to them and said, wait a minute, you can't write an article or a gospel topics essay about Book of Mormon geography without at least mentioning Kamorah, because that was always the key point taught for over a century by the leaders of the church in General Conference. As late as 1975, it was taught in General Conference by President Romney, who was in the first presidency. And they decided, no, we're not even going to propose that to the brethren. We don't want to get into the Kamorah issue. So this essay, which is supposed to be about geography, doesn't even mention Kamorah, which was the key point of this whole thing. It's what Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith both cited Kamorah as evidence of the Book of Mormon. And here, where Joseph talks about the plains of the Nephites as evidence of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon, they don't expound on that at all. Why would that be evidence of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon? Because it corroborated the Cumorah in New York.
Right.
That's the reason.
Yeah.
If it was, it wouldn't support the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon if Cumorah was in Mexico. It would contradict the divine authenticity.
Right.
So the essay was written to try to be ambiguous, but basically it misleads the members of the church around the world, because it does not address what the teachings of the prophets are about this issue. And so when I pointed that out in my criticism, rather than fix it, they just made it worse by deleting what President Ivan said. And I'll show you. I'll give you the link to that for you.
Okay, so I have a question that might stump you.
Okay.
Might stump you. I don't know, but
Okay.
It's okay if it's not to put you on the spot. But a friend of mine, Ed Goebel. So he used to believe in the Heartland. He actually published a book with Wayne May, and now he's not. He's back Mesoamerica. But his thing was, I go, well, what changed your mind? He was actually one of the guys that came up with the Great Lakes being where the narrow neck of land or whatever, which we don't even know if the narrow neck of land. Okay. But anyway, there were many narrow necks of lands possibly. Right.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
heartland theory is. But he said the thing that changed his mind was the land of desolation. Where did Joe Smith say the land of desolation was? Or what does the Book of
Well,
Mormon say? You know what he's talking about, right?
yeah, I know what he's talking about.
Okay, what is he talking about?
This gets into the issue of when it says the land northward and the land
Yeah,
southward.
okay.
The question is that a proper noun or a relative term? And some people would say, well, it's a proper noun. The land northward is a specific place. And I say, no, it's a relative term. So that you're in California, right?
Yes.
So when I live in Oregon, if I'm in my Oregon house, you're in the land southward.
Yes.
But when I'm in New Zealand, you're in the land northward.
Yes.
So where you live can be both the land northward and the land southward, depending on where the speaker is.
Yes.
And I look at the land of desolation exactly the same. Any place where some people can say it's a proper noun, there's only one land of desolation. The other could say anywhere where there was a major battle and people were destroyed is a land of desolation.
I like
So
that. I like that.
Well, so this idea of saying, well, Joseph said this was the land of desolation, therefore it had to be there. I mean, to me, that's a non-starter. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I didn't stump you. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I didn't because I didn't want you to be stumped.
Well, I've thought about all these things from every angle, so.
Well,
I've never talked to Ed about it, but I think if I did, I would understand where he's coming
he's
from.
He's a very intelligent guy.
Sure.
He's awesome. So here's the thing. What's funny too is you go down right after this article and you look down here and it's like there's these two and you see this. Do you see my cursor? Do you see my cursor?
Yeah, I see it.
And then you see this and it says, where did the Book of Mormon happen? And then it says, why did Mormon give so many details about geography? And then if you click on this, right?
Yeah.
Then of course it takes you to where it starts indoctrinating you, right?
Right.
Which is, well, of course that's their stance. But Book of Mormon Central shouldn't have a stance.
Well, they say they don't, but they do.
That's what I'm saying. If you're really sincere about this, then you should be sincere all the way through and through, and allow different people to come and talk about different things. I think the two Kamorah idea.
Yeah.
Actually, because Brant Gardner, wait a minute, let me just say this. Brant Gardner brings up how Mormon gives parts of the plates to Moroni, and then Mormon buries the rest in Cumorah. Moroni's got, what was it? The smaller,
the bridge plates.
The bridge plates. Sorry.
Right.
So Brant brings that up. God bless Brant. He's a good guy. He was very nice, and I want to have him on again, possibly. But his video didn't do very well. People weren't interested in it. I don't know why. Well, because they already have it. We already know that. And he knew that too. I think when he came on, he's like, I'm not telling them anything they don't already know. So, because it's been played out. But so he brought that up like that was going to be a jaw dropper or a mic drop moment, right? What it did is it confirmed more of a heartland.
Yeah.
Meaning, Mormon was there up in North America. It wasn't, he buried the plates in Kamorah. Well, because we obviously know Kamorah, it all happened in Central America. So Kamorah had to be there. Mormon dies in Central America. Then Moroni gallivants with his entourage up into, hundreds and hundreds of miles, 1,000 miles. I don't know how long it is from New York
more
to
than that, but
1,500 miles. I don't know, but
depending on the route,
which I don't have a problem with. People traveled long distances all throughout history. That's not a problem for me.
Troy, think about this. According to the Mesoamerican theory, limited geography, the entire history of the Book of Mormon over 1,000 years took place in a small area in Central America, right? And yet when Moroni is all by himself He hauls all the
But we don't
records.
know if he was all by himself.
Well, okay, but he says he was.
Well,
So,
he says I was alone,
yeah.
but that could mean I'm alone with 27 other people or
Okay,
12 other
whatever.
people.
Whatever. Let's
Or
let's say he's with a small group.
okay.
They're traveling far outside of the realm of the Book of Mormon events. So somehow this civilization was contained within a small area for 1,000 years. But Moroni and his party, let's say, travel all these 1,500, 2,000 miles into
Yeah.
upstate New York. I mean, on his face, that wouldn't even pass
Well,
it.
okay. So I'm just playing the devil's advocate for here
Yeah,
for
no,
a
I
minute
understand.
for academia's sake.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
Because it still doesn't mean that Heartland didn't exist, and I actually
Yeah, no,
gravitate.
I get what you're saying. You're
I
making
actually,
their case.
yeah. So, but that doesn't. Wait, hold on. Lehi left Jerusalem and stayed there. He didn't travel all the time, but then he went a long distance to the coast.
Right.
Okay, so when the Lord's telling a prophet to get up and leave, they tend to travel. They tend to travel long distances.
They can, sure.
So Lehi did it. Moses did it. And then, other people did it. I don't have that's not really a lot of, that's not a mic drop for me. I think that people can travel, and the plates, okay, you could carry heavy things on a mule or a horse or in a wagon.
Yeah, totally.
But what bothers me, or what didn't bother me, what was proof to me that that's more in Heartland, was Joseph and Oliver said Kamorah. Oliver said that Joseph said, or Hiram, who was it? Many people said Kamorah was right there. They called it Kamorah. They said, how would Joseph walk to Kamorah? Joseph never said Kamorah, though, did he? Did Joseph ever say, I have to go get the plates out of Kamorah?
Okay, now this is where you get into historical evidence versus, because we can't say that Joseph never said Kamorah. We can say we don't have a record of him saying it.
Right.
But we have hardly any records of what he actually said until basically the Nauvoo period. And so in his sermons anyway. But look at it this way. His own mother said that during the first time Moroni visited Joseph Smith, he told them that the record was in the hill of Kamorah. And then when he wrote D&C 128:20, Joseph said, "Glad tidings from Kamorah, a record to be, or book to be revealed."
Yeah.
So he knew the name Kamorah before he ever got the plates.
But then Mesoamerica would say glad tidings from Kamorah, meaning Mormon was down in Kamorah, and glad tidings.
I know.
But those plates, those plates never. Okay, here is strength for you, right? Here's fortifying your stance. Okay. Is that if these plates never entered the hill Kamorah, if Mormon was if it was in Central America that Mormon buried the other plates and then gave these to Moroni, then these plates never touched Kamorah. So why would he say greetings from Kamorah if these plates never entered into the hill Kamorah? Does that make sense?
Well, that's why they say there were two Kamorahs. The hill in New York was named Kamorah after the
that's
hill
weird.
in Central America.
That's what I call reaching.
I agree, but I'm just saying that's their rationale.
Right.
But here's the thing that people don't know. First off, and it's been suppressed. It's literally been suppressed by Book of Mormon Central, by this Gospel Topics essay, by the Saints book, and so on, is why did people say Kamorah was in New York? And as I mentioned, Moroni told that to Joseph Smith the first time he met. But then after that, they, according to Oliver Cowdery's recitation in detail of Moroni's visit, Moroni told Joseph Smith that the record was written and deposited not far from his house, which means Mormon had to live not far from Joseph's house.
Wait, Joseph said not very far from his house.
Yeah, said it was not far, it was 3 miles from his house.
Right. And so, Oliver also kept calling it the hill Kamorah, that Joseph got the plates from Kamorah.
Yeah. Everybody did.
Yeah.
This issue, they say, well, Mormon said he put all the records in the hill Kamorah, but Moroni never said where he buried them. Therefore, it couldn't have been in Kamorah. Orson Pratt answered that in the 1840s. maybe it was 1850.
And Orson Pratt was a Heartlander, wasn't he?
Well, he was a hemispheric guy.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about Orson Pratt if you want, but
another time. Well, let's do that another time.
Well, the point he made about Kamorah was he said there are two departments in the hill. There was the repository of all the records that Oliver Cowdery had talked about, and there was a separate stone box that had the abridged plates in it. So there are two departments in the same hill.
Interesting.
Now, Orson Pratt was interesting because he was a hemispheric guy, and that's what Joseph refuted in the Wentworth letter, which we may have talked about. We should talk about another time. But
what do you mean hemispheric? That it was North, Central, and South America?
Yeah, Orson Pratt believed that the Lamanites were all the Indians or Native Americans in Central America.
Oh.
And when Joseph wrote the Wentworth letter, he was following Orson Pratt's article on that, his 1840 pamphlet that he wrote. And when he got to the part about Central America, he crossed all that out, and that's when he said the remnant of Lehi are the Indians that live in this country.
Okay, well, do these Book of Mormon Central people, do they redact that?
Yeah.
They don't talk about it?
No, they don't.
Jonathan, we haven't talked about that very much. That is the most...
Okay.
Wait a minute. That is the most powerful piece of evidence I've ever heard yet.
Well, go to the Joseph Smith manual, lesson manual he had years ago.
Yeah.
We had Teachings of the Prophets, and there's a chapter on the Wentworth letter. And if you go through that,
let's stop sharing. Sorry.
If you go through that chapter, there's a place where there's some ellipses in there. And what they removed in those ellipses is Joseph's statement that the remnant are the Indians that live in this country.
That is the most powerful piece of evidence.
I know.
That, holy moly.
I know. It's crazy.
Wow. All right.
Crazy.
Let's end it here. I've got too much to work with already. This was good. This was good stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Come back again. We'll talk about some more stuff.
Sounds great. Okay.
All right. Thanks. Take care.